In the summer of 1989, a movie moment arrived in cinemas that was so huge, so seismic, so transformative that the industry would never, ever be the same again. Was it Tim Burton's Batman? No. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade? Bigger. Much bigger. The Karate Kid, Part 3? Close, but you're way off. I am of course referring to Weekend at Bernie's. So major, so undeniable, so earth-shattering was this mildly profitable story of two corporate lackeys on vacation, being forced to pretend that their very much dead boss is still alive, that a sequel became completely inevitable, even if it made no sense whatsoever. But they went all in, with voodoo queens, buried treasure, and reanimated beach parties, and people didn't exactly embrace it, because while the original built a strange kind of cult status over the years, Weekend at Bernie's 2 became DOA. But today, I'm here to maybe convince you that both Weekend at Bernie's movies deserve a little more respect. Yes, even the sequel that everybody hates. This is Sequelpalooza. For much of the 1980s, in between their blockbuster contenders, prestige dramas, horror sequels, and whatever this was exactly, Hollywood studios like to have a tentpole comedy or two on their release slate. And if it could be as high concept as possible, then that was even better. We'd had free bachelors raising babies, kids waking up as adults, adults waking up as kids, more body swap chaos, high school geeks creating the perfect woman, vampires hunting virgins, hot mannequins coming to life. Some were great, some less so, but the industry was still clearly all in, even if the high concept formula was in some ways being run into the ground. Where exactly could it go next? Well, Robert Klein thought he'd written a script to top the lot. The premise was simple. Deathly simple. Sorry. The premise was simple and kind of brilliant, and maybe a little bit too much. Despite all sorts of nonsense getting greenlit at the time, and even during the high concept gold rush, Klein's screenplay for Weekend at Bernie's, about two corporate employees who pretend that their deceased boss is still alive during a wild weekend in the Hamptons, was struggling to gain traction. Klein had a resume too. He demonstrated his ability to craft jet black comedy through novels and screenplays, kicking off his Hollywood career with the adaptation of his own book Where's Popper in 1970, before going on to write National Lampoon's European Vacation and episodes of MASH. But Weekend at Bernie's was a legitimately odd film to try to squeeze through the studio system, and no trigger-happy execs were biting. Bernie was kept on ice, at least initially. Enter producer Victor Dre, who had worked with Klein on the 1985 Tom Hanks movie The Man with One Red Shoe, and had a deal with MGM. They put Weekend at Bernie's into development, but got cold feet and backed out. Bernie's eventual savior was First Blood director Ted Kotcheff, who read the script and loved it. I thought it was not only hilarious, but also dark and full of comedic and satirical possibilities. Yes, that's right. The guy who made Rambo also directed Weekend at Bernie's. Now that is range. Kotcheff's varied career extended way beyond Rambo though, and his involvement allowed Dre to get financing from David Begelman's Gladden Entertainment. Begelman had been involved in a huge studio embezzlement scandal in the late 70s, but yeah, at least they had funding for the movie. The pieces fell into place, 20th Century Fox agreed to distribute it, and suddenly, Bernie was alive. Well, actually, that wouldn't happen until the sequel, but he was going in front of the cameras. Or at least, someone was. But who could play a dead dude and make it funny? Terry Kaiser had been a working actor for more than 20 years across stage and screen, but had never had his big break. Bernie was it, if he could only work out how to play him. As Kaiser remembers, watching the early rushes, he concluded that Bernie was not funny dead. he's dead. So after spending all night pulling faces in the mirror, he cracked it. The Bernie smirk was born. Holding it for minutes at a time for take after take, Kaiser somehow created an amazingly large amount of character out of a part which isn't alive from the 33rd minute onwards. It's a hugely underrated, world-class performance. And yes, I am serious. And don't call me Shirley. For Larry and Richard, the two junior employees forced to convince the world that their deceased boss is alive, the producers ended up casting Andrew McCarthy and Jonathan Silverman. McCarthy had emerged as a prominent member of the group dubbed the Brat Pack in films like Pretty in Pink and St. Elmo's Fire, and he'd had a hit with Mannequin. Despite a couple more recent flops, he was still fairly hot property. As for Silverman, he was coming off the truly Sequelpalooza-tastic mess that was Caddyshack 2, but he'd already proved himself on Broadway. They both jumped into the Bernie-based madness with perfectly reckless abandon. And it was madness. In Clayton's story, Larry and Richard uncover a major insurance fraud scheme and take it to their CEO, Bernie Lomax. Unbeknownst to them though, Bernie is behind it. Deep in with the mob, Bernie invites them out to his house in the Hamptons with ulterior motives. But rather than finish off Larry and Richard, the hitman takes out Bernie instead. When they discover his body, they eventually decide to conceal his, lack of life to avoid becoming suspects until they can get back home. And they can have a weekend of partying too. Oh, and the hitman thinks Bernie is still alive. It's all in gloriously bad taste, and clearly the cast were making it in the right spirit. Audiences seem to gravitate towards Weekend at Bernie's too, as in TOO, not the number 2. The sequel is coming up later. Anyway, Fox was so excited about Bernie that they pushed the film out in July of 1989, on the same weekend as Lethal Weapon 2, a move that Dre saw as a huge mistake after test screenings had gone well. We think we have a $100 million movie, while those dumbbells at Fox decide, okay, we're going to counter-program. The film arrived in 8th place on opening weekend, behind not only the Lethal Weapon sequel, but also Batman, Honey I Shrunk the Kids, Dead Poets Society, and The Karate Kid 3, none of which were newcomers. It failed to improve on that positioning across the rest of its run. So Bernie's didn't storm the box office during what was a jam-packed cinematic summer, never got close to $100 million in theatres, but the film turned a profit. It doubled its production budget before becoming a bit of a monster on VHS and would remain a cable TV regular for years. So the people clearly embraced it, but the critics, not so much. When it came to the reviews, analysts who had grown increasingly hostile to Hollywood's high-concept strategy didn't receive Bernie in quite the same way. Even the same critics who had applauded Clayton's earlier work buried Bernie's. Roger Ebert, who liked Where's Popper in the 70s, savaged Bernie's in the 80s.
Weekend at Bernie's, a preposterous, unfunny comedy that comes across like a bad version of a slapstick Blake Edwards film.
I agree with Eugene. I didn't find it funny, and I found it less and less funny as it went along and as poor Bernie was dragged around. But apart from that, it was a bad idea, and it didn't work. I mean, I guess you give him points for trying, but it's just not funny.
Despite a few okay reviews, the general consensus suggested that this was a film that shouldn't have even been made. A movie that Rolling Stone described as proving that it's impossible to drag one tired joke around for nearly 2 hours. But is that really true or fair? What if that joke is funny, building to increasingly ridiculous situations? It's a classic farce comedy strategy, from Chaplin and Keaton to, well, Weekend at Bernie's. One of the leads isn't alive anymore, and almost everyone else doesn't know it. That's the joke. But the way it's performed is what makes it live or, die. The performances are universally strong, but Terry Kaiser steals the show. Kaiser has talked about how he wanted to allow Bernie to maintain a distinct personality even though he's, dead. And honestly, in a movie not known for its subtlety, his nuanced turn completely makes the film. The slapstick also reveals an increasingly dark underbelly, which most reviews barely considered at the time. It could even be argued that the film dissects and satirizes 80s yuppie culture, with Larry and Richard becoming increasingly detached from reality as they end up prioritizing their own short-term needs over basic human decency. As Catherine Mary Stewart's character Gwen's reaction makes clear once they actually reveal their plot to another human being, this is not normal. Maybe I'm reading a little bit too much into it, but Weekend at Bernie's works on more than one level. Yes, really. Either way, I genuinely think critics prejudged it and got it wrong. Weekend at Bernie's wasn't meant to have a sequel, but by the go-go early 90s, when even mild success got franchised, and as the VHS money continued to roll in, producer Victor Dre soon realized that Bernie wouldn't be buried for good quite yet. And this time, Robert Klein would be sitting in the director's chair. To raise the stakes just enough, we were heading to the Caribbean, where a carnival of chaos awaited.
Sure hope you're enjoying the film so far. You know, we made that one back in 1989. We got a new one appropriately entitled Weekend at Bernie's 2.
Do you notice Bernie's the only one who hasn't aged? Do you think that's a facelift or what?
Well, he had to do something. He's been dead 4 years.
He's brilliant in this new movie, you know. I think he's got Oscar written all over him. In fact, let's do that.
Let's do. Oh, don't. Come on. There's no such thing as dying with dignity. We'll be right back.
Thank you for choosing Culture Slice Travel. Here at CST, we pride ourselves on delivering unforgettable getaways for barely twice the price of our leading competitors. From family adventures to sun-soaked party escapes, from rustic retreats to darts on the beach, from luck dragon flight to stress-free business travel, we do it all, and it's delivered with our patented no money back guarantee. So whether you're seeking relaxation or once-in-a-lifetime nightlife, make sure you're subscribed to avoid missing out on our next trips to the glory days of pop culture. And for premium upgrades, including early boarding for every new release, you can also become a Club Slice channel member. Now let's get back to the beach for a sequel so memorable it could bring a corpse back to life. By the early 1990s, there was a clear trend for sequels to high-concept 80s comedies not delivering as studios had hoped. Mannequin 2 On the Move was a complete dud at the box office, despite featuring actual Terry Kaiser as an evil sorcerer. Look Who's Talking 2 turned a profit, but was savaged by critics, and by the time they added Talking Dogs for Look Who's Talking Now, the trilogy film could only just scrape past $10 million in cinemas. Even Three Men and a Little Lady, a movie that meant a lot to me as a kid, was a financial disappointment for Disney. Though some weren't outright disasters, there was a clear declining audience trend. But by 1993, Weekend at Bernie's 2 would be different, right? Victor Dre certainly thought so. He went ahead and purchased the sequel rights. With Ted Koscheck off making episodes of Red Shoe Diaries and directing Tom Selleck without a mustache in the 1992 comedy Folks, Weekend at Bernie's 2 went into production with Klein in the director's chair instead, filming his own script. McCarthy, Silverman, and crucially Terry Kaiser all agreed to return. TriStar took over North American distribution from Fox. The pieces were again falling into place. Now Klein just needed to work out how to take Weekend at Bernie's to the next level. And to achieve it, he went with voodoo queens, reanimated corpses, and a trip to the Caribbean. The plan for filming the sequel in the US Virgin Islands came from Kaiser, who, when asked where he wanted to make it, suggested it happened somewhere hot. Because that's right, the most shocking part about Weekend at Bernie's 2 was that they weren't even at Bernie's at all. This time, Larry and Richard are blamed for Bernie's theft from the company and fired. To clear their name, the pair decide to hunt down Bernie's $2 million bounty, which is hidden somewhere in St. Thomas in the US Virgin Islands. And they need Bernie along for the ride too. Oh, and Larry falls for local girl Claudia. The only problem is, the cash is no longer a secret, and mobsters have hired a voodoo queen and her henchmen to find it. Oh, and they've reanimated Bernie, which the lads don't know about. but they used a pigeon instead of a chicken for the ceremony, which means that Bernie only moves to music. So Bernie can't talk, but he sure can dance, and he's bringing the party in the Virgin Islands. And soon, everyone is moving like Bernie. You know, reanalyzing the story clarifies just how crazy this movie is. Unsurprisingly, Weekend at Bernie's 2 did not go down well with critics. It was labelled relentlessly awful, a wretched excuse for a film comedy, and as pathetic and unfunny as comedies get. As Entertainment Weekly summed it up, the original 1989 Dead Guy farce maybe had a few laughs if you caught it on cable at 1 in the morning, blind drunk. Weekend at Bernie's 2 is not quite that good. And it didn't hit the mark with cinema goers either, arriving on July 9th, 1993, in the peak of summer blockbuster season. Part 2 barely scraped into the top 10 in its opening weekend, being outperformed by the likes of the Dennis the Menace movie and the Pauly Shore vehicle Son-in-Law. By the following week, it was out of the top 10 completely, eventually making just over $12 million in theatres. So it actually had a fairly similar box office trajectory to the first movie, just taking far less money and leaving much less of a cultural footprint. Sadly, even though the second movie would maintain a small screen presence, it clearly wasn't enough to necessitate a third film in the series to complete a trilogy that would rival Star Wars. The two films didn't exactly supercharge the Hollywood careers of anyone involved either. McCarthy and Silverman both continued to work, a lot, but they dropped away from starring in mainstream films. McCarthy especially remains an iconic face of the 80s though. He also, funnily enough, became a director and travel writer, so if Bernie's 3 ever happened, he could take over the megaphone for sure, and scope out the location. His 2024 Brat Pack documentary Brats is great. Ted Kotcheff didn't have another movie in cinemas after 1995's Hidden Assassin with Dolph Lundgren, which went straight to video in North America anyway. Terry Kaiser would regularly turn up on stage and screen, and opened an acting school, but he'll always be known as Bernie. As for Victor Dre, he basically made no money from the first movie despite all the home media success, but did make a tidy profit from the second after buying the rights. He left the industry after the sequel, still frustrated at the original's bungled cinema rollout. There's something strangely apt about the fact that he went from producing Bernie's to becoming one of the top nightclub owners in Vegas. He probably decided there were fewer sharks in the late night industries of Sin City. But Weekend at Bernie's has lived on in popular culture. It would often turn up as a punchline in Seinfeld or How I Met Your Mother or Beavis and Butthead, or you get the point. Usually based around how ridiculous the concept was and how the fact that there was a terrible sequel was kind of unbelievable. Then at the start of the 2010s, everyone on YouTube seemed to suddenly be moving like Bernie in a dance craze inspired by Terry Kaiser's genuinely awesome moves. It even had its own song and everything. It was a bit like a pre-Harlem Shake, only, you know, way better. Bernie was back in the news in 2014 too. Klain and Kotcheff joined forces again to sue for unpaid profit-sharing residuals, stating, according to the court documents, that each of them has been deprived of at least hundreds of millions of dollars. Even as a fan, that seems like a bit of a stretch. And when it came to the Weekend at Bernie's fandom, it wasn't like people were constantly quoting lines or building their love of the film into their lifestyle or whatever. Very few thought it was good enough for that. But I'm here today to say that maybe Weekend at Bernie's 2 deserved a lot better than ridicule. 13% on Rotten Tomatoes, 16 on Metacritic, painfully torn apart or mocked on Letterboxd review after Letterboxd review, and I read an interview where Andrew McCarthy even said it was terrible. Well, in response to all of that, I think it's time for me to say respectfully that I disagree. So alright, Weekend at Bernie's 2 isn't a masterpiece, and neither is the original really, but I do genuinely believe that both movies deserve a better result in the court of public opinion. The first film's reputation has improved over time, and I think it's an instant classic, but Part 2 still gets absolutely hammered at almost every turn, and it's all a fair bit cleverer than people give it credit for. There is a strange brilliance in the ridiculousness of it all, and the way they level that up in part 2 is genuinely kind of inspired. When I look at some of the actually terrible sequels we've covered so far in this series, Caddyshack 2, Highlander 2, Highlander 5, The Never-Ending Story 3, Weekend at Bernie's 2 does so much more than any of them. It's not even in the same stratosphere. The consensus around it as one of the worst sequels ever is something I've never been able to get my head around. The brief for part 2 was to increase the madness, and they did it. But unlike those other sequels we've covered, where the production seemed to completely run away from the filmmakers, you never really feel like Robert Klane loses control, even when he goes balls to the wall bonkers. As crazy as things get, there is still a weird precision to it. It's a Generation X Shakespearean farce. A Midsummer Night's Dream with added zombie. It makes absolutely no sense to even have a sequel, but they embrace it. And that's all part of the charm of these films. They know they're ridiculous, that's where the humour comes from. Andrew McCarthy revealed a few years ago that his 15-year-old son had concluded of the original that, "Dad, that movie is really stupid." But McCarthy saw that as a positive. That movie was completely stupid and fantastic. I love Bernie. I think Bernie is great. And I am with Andrew on this one. That goes for the sequel too, even if he himself doesn't like it. Maybe it's a generational thing, but I hope it isn't, because if Weekend at Bernie's is just stupid and for the bargain bin of history, then so are any number of farces from across comedy history. Back in the late 90s, I went to see my godfather perform in a West End production of a play called Black Comedy. David Tennant was in the cast too. The premise was really simple. When the stage lights were on, the characters were supposed to be in darkness, and when the lights went off, they could suddenly see. On paper, that sounds ridiculous, maybe even stupid, but because of the commitment it was delivered with, the comic timing, and the way the chaos slowly escalated, it goes down as one of the funniest things I've ever seen on stage or screen. The Weekend at Bernie's movies maybe aren't the funniest things I've ever seen, but I think they are better than each of their online footprint might have you believe. They're un-PC and ridiculous and have their own internal logic that is completely illogical, but I think the world would honestly be better off with more movies in cinemas like Weekend at Bernie's, and yes, Weekend at Bernie's too. Or any movies like them would be nice. I miss the era when studios would regularly include major comedy releases as a key part of their summer slate. In 1989, 20th Century Fox looked at a film as weird as Weekend at Bernie's and said, "Yep, that's our movie." And I kind of love that. TriStar did it again a few years later with Part 2. It didn't work out as well, but I'm not mad at that one either. I called this video the misunderstood genius of Weekend at Bernie's, kind of sarcastically, but also kind of not, because it's hard to make a movie this ridiculous work, and I think they did it, twice, even if nobody else agrees with me. Maybe I've lost my mind, maybe I'm possessed, maybe I need a holiday, but the Weekend at Bernie's movies are actually pretty cool, even though they're not cool at all. And Terry Kaiser, man, what a performance. Give that man an award and I will die on that beach if I have to. Now where's my pina colada? I think I fancy moving like Bernie. What do you think about the Weekend at Bernie's movies? Have I lost my mind, or are they actually good? Let me know in the comments, and once you've done that, I've got a few more questions for you. Have you ever wondered where Culture Slice actually came from? Or what it's really like to try to build a YouTube channel from scratch? Do you like data? Well, if the answer to at least one of these questions is yes, then you, my friend, are in luck, because I've just dropped this video over on our second channel, Culture Slice Cuts, looking back across my first 2 years on YouTube. The highs, the lows, and the bits people don't usually talk about. It's honest, sometimes brutally, and totally different to anything else I've ever made before. If you think that sounds cool, the link's on screen and in the description. As always, thanks for watching, and yes, save Ferris.